realizing that I wasn't kind of meeting that made me feel like I was a failure.
Hey everybody, this is Dr. Aaliyah with another episode of And I Should Care Because, the podcast where we talk about higher education policy changes and to help you navigate those changes one news story at a time. But ain't no news story today. Today we are still going through these interview snippets with my good friend Thomas Bertarelli, who's currently working in the private sector while he is finishing his PhD part time. So if you watch the other snippets, we've talked about him, in his journey in undergrad and how he realized later on in his undergrad career that, oh, I don't, I think I like this other thing here. I thought I was just going to stick with the pre-med track, and now I'm really interested in sociology. So we talked about that and how you can kind of switch majors without switching majors. Then we talked about his journey from undergrad to a gap year and then a master's program and transitioning from master's to PhD. But now we're getting to a little bit of trouble in paradise where there was some doubt about whether or not the PhD was even the right call for him anymore. And so in this part of the interview conversation, intersation, converview, none of those work. But you know what I'm trying to say. It's not just an interview, it's a conversation between two close friends. He talks about kind of why the seeds of doubt were planted and how he ended up taking a leave of absence for 3 semesters, what it looks like, kind of the nuts and bolts, and what his thought process was in coming to that decision. We always talk about, oh, once you start school, you need to finish, you need to finish, you need to finish. But it may not always be the right call for you. You have permission to do something different and take care of yourself. So we're going to go back to that interview, intersation. I'm gonna find something to describe it because it's not just a straight up interview. Anyway, by this point, y'all know what I'm talking about. Watch the interview. I'll see you back here. So you're doing all of this absorbing, all this sponging, and then you're trying to spin something new. Talk to me about when did the doubt start to set in of like, is this really what I should be doing? I like my field, but is the PhD for me?
Yeah, yeah. I think that it definitely started creeping in towards maybe year two or year three. So, at the beginning of the program, I was a very kind of bushy-tailed, bright-eyed, like, yes, I made it. Look at me. Um, but along the way, I started, once you get into a PhD program, the realities of academia being a job hit in a new way that really I don't necessarily think you maybe are aware of as an undergrad, right? Because again, you're a student, they're a teacher, you're in an institution. There are a lot of kind of walls in between where you are and where other people are. But those walls start to crumble down, especially after you pass your exams. And intellectually you're kind of getting closer and closer to being a professor. And once you take your exams, you understand that you're working towards a job, right? You're trying to do something with your degree, right? It's not just like you get a PhD and then it forever just like what pays you dividends. Like, no, you actually have to do something
I
with what you're
wish.
trying to.
I
Yeah, exactly, right.
wish.
And as I went further into graduate school, you start having a lot more conversations with people who are trying to get on the job market, right? Doing something with your diploma. And back in even so this is before COVID, this is before 2020. Even then there were it was not even just a whisper, it was like active conversations about how the job market really just is not good. There were a lot more people with PhDs than job positions that were opening tenure track job positions. People from my department, people from other departments, really like R1 institutions that had to go into lecture positions. They had to, be adjuncts, in order to help make ends meet. And, it started slowly dawning on me that like, I think in general, for the longest time, I was thinking about like, oh yeah, like they went into like a lecture position, but like that's not going to be me. I'm going to have a different path. But like the closer you get to that reality, the more you realize this might actually be me. And am I preparing myself for the reality of not getting a tenure track job out of undergrad, out of once I get my PhD, and is the reality of trying to scrape together a living doing like adjunct work in several courses, maybe even several institutions simultaneously, is that worth the amount of effort it takes to get a PhD? Because getting a PhD is not easy. It takes a lot of self-sacrifice, a lot of work. And is all of that work worth it if you're only going to become an adjunct professor? Is it worth it if, speaking a little bit more personally, like towards the longer I stayed in Boston, the more I got grounded here, both in terms of place, but I was also starting a relationship, right? I ended up getting married at the end, but I was more firmly rooted in Boston for personal reasons, for family reasons, and if I wanted to continue my degree and really push for a tenure track job, I may very well have to get a postdoc after getting my PhD, maybe even two. And that again would require not going where I wanted to go. I'd have to go where the position was. And those aren't easy to get either. A postdoc versus a tenure track job. So it would be a lot of bouncing around. And am I setting myself up to be happy, quite frankly? Like if my end goal is to live a life where I can, at the end of the day, say that, I've done right by myself. I've done right by my family, because family was very important to me and I have the luxury of that. Is bouncing around going to allow me to live that kind of a life? And, I think there came a point after I took my exams where I was like, no, I don't see this road. It's become completely blurred for me. And so that's the reason, that's kind of the logic that led up to why I ended up taking a break from my PhD program and ultimately really taking that next step and going on leave from the department in my program.
There are so many good things in there and so many things that I vibe with that I'm like, wow. I think that we think about STEM and social sciences and humanities as these very separate things, but the experience is so similar. And the emotional roller coaster is so similar. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And the putting in all of that effort and just thinking about it, like, is it really worth it? Like I think about cooking. Sometimes there's this really elaborate dish that's like, man, that looks great. And then you start the recipe and you're like, okay, okay, we're not done yet. This could have been great 5 hours ago. Why am I still working on this? And it doesn't feel like all the effort that you put into it was worth it. You went and found some Chilean pepper that grows on one side of a mountain and like, why did I do this? I could have used a poblano from Kroger. It would have tasted the same. So, having that, oh no, am I wasting my time?
Yeah.
I think that we all have that question at least a few times during the PhD program process.
Sure.
Of, is this still worth the investment? And then thinking about bouncing around and going where the job is, the job market, it's definitely a huge question mark. And it's become a bigger and bigger question mark over time because so many more people are staying in school instead of trying to get a job because there's no jobs. So now you have all these educated people trying for fewer and fewer positions because tenure track positions, once you're there, you kicking it. Who's going to leave that? Maybe you go to another institution, but you carry your tenure status with you. So I totally hear you on that. But here's my question. I have a couple of questions. All right. So the first one is, when you were thinking about your family and prioritizing yourself and what you need to feel whole and happy, was there any guilt about saying, I don't know if this PhD is worth sacrificing this? Was there anything in the back of your head that's like, no, but you're supposed to be an academic, or you're supposed to be this, you're supposed to be that, you should stay in this program? So that's the first question I want to throw out there. And then the second one is more the nuts and bolts of, how do you take a leave of absence? I know it's different for every school, but what was the process for you? What did you have to do, paperwork or whatever, to
Mhm.
actually officially do that?
Sure. So, a lot of what I was thinking about when I made the transition was about, so not only kind of am I setting myself up for the life that I want to live, but also am I setting myself up for the kind of work that I would find gratifying? I went into graduate schooling not only because I wanted to become an academic, a teacher, or a critical thinker. I went into it because I genuinely enjoyed the work. I liked the work of being a graduate student. I liked reading. I liked learning these new things that genuinely, like, I, I found it fascinating. Like, I'm not going to say it kept me up at night thinking about like social theory, but like I was
How
surrounded
dare
by
you?
people who, yeah, right. I was surrounded by people who were having really interesting conversations. I was reading things that were kind of really mentally stimulating and engaging, and I wanted to do that. And so in my mind, for the longest time, like I thought to myself that like, yes, it's going to be hell to be an academic, but like I'm doing something that I find very personally motivating. And a lot of what I needed to kind of work through, or maybe even set aside, was figuring out, is anything else other than academia going to be as personally self-fulfilling? And I ended up coming to a place where I could like kind of transfer over some of my interests into the private sector. But I don't necessarily think that it's ever been like a clear 100% transfer of what I wanted, what are like my ideal state thing that I would like to do. But I had to just reorient, I think, what my expectations were and how to go about being fulfilled in the work that I do. Um, have I gone so far afield from your first question?
No, you haven't.
No.
You haven't. So we're talking about kind of the what goes into that conversation with yourself of
Mm,
leaving and prioritizing your happiness and your fulfillment over that piece of you that I think we all have of,
mm.
but you're an academic, you're supposed to do this, you're supposed to finish, you're supposed to.
Yeah, yeah.
So that I think that
Yeah.
satisfies that.
Yeah,
But
and like
what was the
just because like
process?
so I'll get to the process, but I
Yeah.
think that so much of like my own personal, like academic, personal career growth has been breaking down my self, like my own assumptions about what I think the right thing looks like. And so this
Mm.
one really was no different from the decision. Well, of course, it was very different in kind of its particulars, but very similar to the decisions that I made in undergrad to kind of switch from neuroscience to sociology, because like I was working under this framework of what I think I needed to do. But the more that I pushed, the more I realized that like nobody else was really working under the same assumption of what should do looks like, because it's different for every person. And so a lot of what I actually had to do in order to make a shift was to mentally break down what I move from what I thought I needed to do and move to what I felt comfortable in myself actually doing, living a life that I wanted to live, right? Because these are sometimes two different things. And being able to like make that jump, push down those barriers and just say that like screw that, I need to do this because like right now this is what makes sense in my life. Um, is difficult. It's hard work. But it's worth it in my experience at least. Um,
Agreed. Two snaps.
two snaps, yes, in a Z formation. Um, Now, the actual work of taking a leave of absence takes bureaucracy, because academic institutions are bureaucracies. Paperwork needs to be filed, conversations need to be had. Um, Fortunately, my department was able to help me with that. So it required a conversation with my graduate advisor first, but also the chair of graduate studies in my department, because she was the liaison between the department and the School of Arts and Sciences. So she helped facilitate the paperwork that I needed to fill out. Um, I think I also needed to technically get approval in order to take a leave. My department didn't give her any kind of a pushback, but I think they needed to give like sign off that yes, like we approve of this. It's being done for the right reasons, or at the very least, not under duress of any kind. So there was paperwork that was involved, definitely some conversations. Um, and I'm trying to think back, but it's been a couple years if I'm missing anything. Um, you definitely also you have to think of there are a lot of things that come with that. Oftentimes if you're leaving your so graduate school offers a couple of things. So if you're a PhD student, sometimes you have a stipend. So you'll need to figure out if you're going on leave, you might not be able to have access to that stipend, right? Your stipend clock might stop as well. You can pick it up again afterwards if you decide to come back, but that will stop. Oftentimes, as a graduate student, in a PhD program, you have health insurance. That might very well may stop as well. I was fortunate in that the timing was good for me to make my switch because I actually had a job. I had a job offer that I accepted before I went on leave. So I had a plan set up for what I would be doing. So I knew where my salary was going to be coming in. I knew I'd have insurance, and I was able to break at a point at the end of the semester. So it worked out for me in that way. Which is to say that there are a lot of other things that you need to think about, right? Because you might not be able to lean on family, friends for housing, right? Because you need to pay for your rent somehow, health insurance. I know that you have it up through age 26 through your parents, but if you're older than 26, what do you do? So there are a lot of things that you need to think about, rather unfortunately, right? Because this is a decision that has lots of consequences.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like your department was definitely supportive, but I could imagine that advisors could be upset,
Mhm.
because their success is also based on your success. So if
Sure.
they lose someone that's going to publish or is cranking through experiments and stuff and providing a lot of data, then that's a huge loss. And they don't know if you're coming back.
Yeah, sure.
So there could be some bitterness there, and then that could influence whether or not you do come back because they could be like, well, I don't think I want to do this anymore. Like there's so many things that you have to consider, and it's such an individualized process that
Mhm.
it's
Oh, yeah.
hard to give specific advice. But I think this is a story that doesn't get told. We're so
Mhm.
focused on how do you go straight through, how do you get this done, how do you get this done, how do you stay in it, and there's no room for change. There's no room for
Yeah.
self-discovery and redirection. So I'm really
Yeah.
grateful that you agree to talk about this because I think it's the other side of the coin that we need to put out there so people feel more emboldened to actually try something new and know that there's a way to pivot. It may not be easy. There may be some hurt feelings, there may be some regrets, but there's still a path forward. And as long as you're growing and you're moving closer and closer to what it is that you're looking for and what it is that's the best fit for you and the life you want to lead, then it's a win.
Mhm. Yeah, and I just want to add to that. I think that one of the difficult parts of stomaching my own decision to leave academia was because I was surrounded by professors, by tenure track professors. So for all intents and purposes, I was surrounded by success stories. Right, my advisor was brilliant, really brilliant academic. Everybody in my department just super stellar, like thinkers, like their career trajectories are phenomenal. Their CVs are like 10 pages long, and that's just their research output in the past 2 years. And so realizing that I wasn't kind of meeting that made me feel like I was a failure. But right, in going back to my comments about thinking about like rethinking my framework of what I wanted to do, just because I wasn't that or wasn't no longer aspiring to do that doesn't mean I was a failure. It just meant I was going on a different path that made more sense to me. Um, and so, it's of course really good to have a North Star, right? Find an academic that you really want to mimic your career after. Because I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but I'm saying that that's not the only way to be a successful in your life as an academic or otherwise.
Yeah, great point. Because I think that one track mind of, okay, if you're going to graduate school and you're getting a PhD,
Mhm.
then that means that you're going to be a professor somewhere doing research. And that's just not the case. Your skill set is transferable to so many different places, and you can be an entrepreneur. So, like, there's so many options that we don't talk about. It's just assumed that if you're doing this, then you're going to end up as a professor somewhere until the day you're ready to stop teaching, at which point then you're, professor emeritus. And like, that doesn't have to be what life is.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
you had this job,
Mhm.
you're in it for a while. And then the question of Do I go back? Do I say thanks but no thanks to the PhD program? When did that question start to kind of come back in? Like, am I ready for this? Am I ready to make a decision? And then what was the thought process? Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that this conversation has been helpful, and that if there are some seeds of doubt, that it's okay to explore them. It's okay to take a break, take a step back, and reevaluate your priorities. It's okay to prioritize your family. It's okay to prioritize being in one particular geographic location and not having to chase the dream everywhere around the globe. It's okay to consider those things, and it's okay to step back or step away and say, no, I don't want to do this anymore. It may be scary, but there is a way through it. And if it really is the best decision for you, it will feel better on the other side. Make sure that you put your comments, your thoughts in the comments below. Hit me up on Twitter, all the things, and let me know if this is helpful. I think that having this perspective when you're considering graduate school is really helpful, to know that there is a, get out of jail free card. That once you start it, it's not like, oh man, I'm stuck for the next 7 years of my life or something like that. You're not. You just have to advocate for yourself and not be afraid to do things differently. With that, I hope you make it a great day, and come on back for the next episode. I'll see you soon. Bye.